So like I said, this is not a panel on regulation. This is a panel on innovation and the role that regulation plays in it. So I'm Alan Cohn. I'm the co-chair of the blockchain and cryptocurrency practice at Crypto LLP, law firm in Washington, D.C., and co-founder and principal of Blockchain Concepts Group, a strategic advisory and consulting and investing entity in DC as well. I'm joined today, going from left to right, by Rita Lupiger, a partner at MLL Legal, Dimitris Sasaris, I might mangle that, Tsarakis, co-founder of Valueverse, Nomini Rubin, Chief Policy Officer at Hedera, and Marta Belcher, who wears many hats, including the president and chair of the Filecoin Foundation. So this is a great panel because we have folks with some really good expertise and experience from a variety of viewpoints. And like I said, we're not going to talk about regulation as regulation. We're not going to explain the Howey test again. We're not going to just say what bad it is. We're going to talk about the role of regulation in helping to drive forward innovation. We're going to talk about specific examples in our industry where that's happened. We're going to talk about specific impediments to that. So to that end, we're going to start with the question of, from this past year, and I'll use this past year to mean everything until about noon today, Central European time. What's been the most impactful regulatory event in terms of either helping drive innovation forward, or continuing to help kind of restrain innovation from proceeding? I'll go left to right, so Ray, I'll start with you.
Great, thanks. I think as I'm the only Swiss here, I take up the Swiss part. And as we have a very big staking services industry, last year it was really about providing staking services, and the regulator FINMA coming in mid last year with their thoughts about staking services need a banking license, staked assets are being on balance, needing capital being underlined, and so on. And then actually what was interesting is the industry joined forces with legals, with associations in whatever, and we talked with FINMA really in depth also about technology, about how validator nodes really work, what's it about, where are the risks, and in the end we brought FINMA to clarify. It was, we call it clarification in the end of the year, that and agreed that under specific circumstances staking services can be done with AML only, without banking license, and it's off balance sheet for the regulated ones. And with this, it was a rather small clarification, but with this we got one of, I would say, the first leading staking regulations here and giving space to innovation in this way.
Perfect. Dimitris.
I just realized that staking is not virtual asset service providers part in MiCA, so we forgot to write something over there. But I bring my pain and my endless nights, so the drafting of parts of MiCA and the DLT pilot regime. So to me, the most important event was the completion of the trialogues of MiCA and the initiation of regulatory technical standards. To give you an idea, I feel that we have 160 pages of MiCA and 1,000 pages of regulatory and technical standards in order to make sure that you all understand the same thing. And I think that it's important because European Union is one of the major Western pro-market teams of states that provide a framework that usually is replicated to other places. We call it the Brussels effect. So this is my biased view.
So impactful, important, and a lot of reading for you guys all to do on your travels. Nomini.
Well, from my unbiased view, I would have to agree with my colleague that the biggest development, we are good friends, the biggest development has to be MiCA, because it affects more people and more money than the other, which were good developments. There's a lot of really great things that happened this year, but I would pick MiCA as the biggest work. So thank you for all your work on that.
Perfect. Varda.
So I would say, with a more U.S. Focused view, I think that unfortunately this year has had a lot of very negative developments, specifically with various cases being brought and regulators asserting that effectively every cryptocurrency is a security in the US. I think that the things that have been happening in courts have been some positive developments. For example, the Ripple decision, very, very positive in helping to bring clarity. And I think it has become absolutely critical that we get clarity on this issue. And so another very important update was the market structure bill passing out of the House Financial Services Committee. Not actually law yet and a long way to go, but still I think could be very impactful.
Yeah, it's still sad commentary in the U.S. that just passing out of committee is progress. Progress. I'll just mention the item that wasn't mentioned, but if you sat in a regulatory panel or a related panel this week, you've heard about the Bitcoin ETF approval in the U.S. This is important and interesting, and but I would say to read two things. Number one is the actual approval, which foreshadows that maybe this isn't the development in terms of overarching approval by the SEC of all things crypto. And if you need more color on that, our Steptoe blockchain blog has a new post up for that. But the other thing I would say, though, and why I think it's even more impactful, is our Treasury Department's been really waiting for institutional entities to have a real skin in the game in gap filling on regulation. And this brings a number of entities into the fold past the SEC bottleneck with regulatory gaps that need to be filled in. So I think these are going to become new and important interlocutors on regulatory issues in the U.S. And I say it because I was struck in other panels, and maybe you have all heard as well. But of course, that particular issue in the U.S. ripples out volume. There have been exchange traded products for a long time, for several years, but the volumes are just very, very different. So that's a good example of the way that regulation kind of can have a directional impact on innovation in this area. So let me ask the follow-up question, which is, let's expand on that issue of the role that regulation can play in innovation. And Marta, maybe I can start with you on this one.
Sure, absolutely. So, I think that one of the things that is kind of a myth about the cryptocurrency space is that it's unregulated. In reality, it is an extremely regulated space. And then I think the other thing that is important to keep in mind is that there really isn't such a thing as regulating technologies. What you do is you regulate activities. And so, for example, if you're committing fraud, it doesn't matter what technology you use to commit fraud, right? That's illegal, whether you're using US dollars or the telephone or pen and paper or cryptocurrency. And so this is already a pretty heavily regulated space. I think where, at least in the cryptocurrency context, some examples of where you really do need very affirmative regulation at the moment, I think. Two things I would say. The first is, I think, stablecoin legislation. We really do need specific clarity on that. And then the second is, we definitely need clarity on when and under what circumstances cryptocurrencies are securities.
Yeah, that's great. And just a note from our organizers, do not commit fraud.
I agree completely. I also agree completely with Marta and what she was saying. What I think is that many regulators and policymakers in many countries recognize the importance of regulation for innovation, and that's why they're doing it. I had meetings this year in Brussels, and I went to a few where, so as background, I grew up in Palo Alto, which is the heart of Silicon Valley. So I go to Brussels, and they're saying things like, Brussels is the Silicon Valley of regulation. So for me, my heart is thinking, I'm sure they're psyched, but So it's like they recognize how important regulation is for innovation, because if you are wanting to follow the rules, you're going to go to a jurisdiction where there are clear rules. And in the US, the challenge is that when you talk, maybe because we have so much hubris. I worked on the Hill for 12 years in the administration, and we have so much hubris because the US economy is so large and we have so many great companies. People think that it will always continue like that. And so they don't think that they have to move fast. And it is a problem, and it makes our innovators in the US nervous.
Good point. Demetrius, rebuttal on Brussels.
Well, Reto, do you want to, because I want to be provocative and I want to be in the end of this.
All right.
No problem. I can take over because I think in the end it's as said before. In short, I mean, innovation is looking for legal certainty in the end, and I think Switzerland gave a good example. I mean, although I think blockchain loves us for decentralized governance structures and federalism, democracy, whatever, but in the end it was our regulator early on, already in 13, 14, talking with the crypto companies, trying to understand them, and then early on really saying, we simply apply our existing financial market regulations and other regulations in a technology neutral manner. And that's what they tried, and I guess, at least at the beginning, that was really the success story of blockchain in Switzerland.
Very non-provocative. Demetrius, over to you.
I will reply to your comment before the end of this panel. But no, it's it will be friendly. But on your point, it's very important to understand what is the role of regulation in an economic activity, and it has a strong economic impact. So we more or less understand how a regulator is afraid to take risks. They want to make sure that there is market integrity and all this stuff. We all get this stuff, but how in practice works. Whatever it is, an innovation about a technology, innovation about an instrument, it's all about a business model, an operational model, and a profitability model. The business model creates value, it's about creating value. The operational model is about how you deliver value. And the profitability model is from the value you created, how much you capture as a company. These three aspects determine how the regulator acts. Things can be legal or illegal or controversial in the value generation process, in the value delivery process, or in the profitability process. And I can give you a very important example, I think, that I saw in my career in the European Parliament from a defunct project, Libra. They explain to us how they generate value. They explain to us how they deliver value. And when we ask them, how the hell you make money, guys? They will say, but we do good for the humanity. No, this was a huge red flag. If you cannot explain how you work on this economic environment, you will have a lot of problems. And it's good to have a regulator over there to support this thought process for any innovation.
That's a great point. And I want to pause really. Anyone want to respond to that? I thought that was it. That was a very interesting. All right. Then I will throw out my. But I'm not going to let you off the hook on that. But I would actually say one of the best examples I've seen in our industry is not the Ripple decision of last year, which I hope provides finally structuring guidance in the U.S., but the earlier Ripple decision, which is the 2015 FinCEN action against Ripple. Now, no, Ripple didn't like that, and the industry didn't like that, but it had the impact of growing today's compliance and industry that the digital asset industry is using to advance into institutional adoption, to advance into new products. And it's an example of where I think regulatory action, even where painful, can have a salutary effect in our environment. My apologies to Ripple for having to bring up that ugly episode of their past. One thing that's particularly frustrating in the US is the question about regulatory fragmentation and harmonization. We're much more fragmented in the United States And we seem to be moving in somewhat different directions than what seems to be more of an emerging consensus outside the US, even across a variety of jurisdictions. Nomi, maybe you want to start on what's the impact of that on innovation?
Well, it's stifling. The lack of movement in the United States on policy and regulation is stifling innovation, and it's creating unnecessary uncertainty. It's creating hesitation for investment. And it's really not good for the U.S. economy and for our consumer uses. But it's possible to have movement. It's very hard in the U.S. Marta and I actually testified before Congress on the very same day, but two different committees, and that was really unusual because they were coordinating, working on work. So there's possible for things to move, but it is rife with challenge, and I don't want to be negative and discouraging. So I would just say that even though it doesn't look like things will grow soon, you still have to plow the fields.
I like that. Do you also feel like it is an issue, though? Do you feel there's a widening gap between where the U.S. is trying to get through its policy process and where the rest of the world seems to be going?
It's really interesting in the U.S. because there's a what happened was FTX. That really destroyed a lot of goodwill amongst policymakers, and that's what they associate with our industry is harm, and they want to protect people, and they're trying to sideline the entire technology. And so it is up to the community to explain that it is more than a bad actor and bad activities. There's a whole ecosystem and technologies that are beneficial. And that education, which GBC is doing amazing well, it's a lot. We have 435 members of the House, 100 members in the Senate, plus the administration. There's a lot of people to talk to, and a lot of people with different pieces of incremental power. So it's going to take a huge amount of work, and we also need the companies to do it, because if it's just a faceless technology, they won't care. But if they care, they do care about getting reelected. Politicians' currency is votes. And so when they hear from their constituents that this is something that matters, you do have a chance to move that.
Vote coin. Marta, your thoughts on fragmentation, fragmentation both within the U.S. and also between the U.S. and where the rest of the world seems to be going.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, of course, in the U.S., it's very complex. You have many policymakers who are doing fantastic work who are, very keen to give clarity to cryptocurrency companies and digital assets innovators. And at the same time, you have all these different sort of battlefronts, right? You have the courts, you have the regulators themselves, and then you have Congress. And I think when it comes to sort of the fragmentation in the United States, unfortunately, a lot of this is now falling on the courts. Very, very, very slow, but that's sort of the backstop of, we haven't gotten from Congress clarity on whether and under what circumstances cryptocurrencies are securities. And so what has happened is we have a regulator that is taking the position that literally almost every cryptocurrency is an unregistered security. And we now have court battles where that is going to play out. And that creates an unbelievable amount of uncertainty. I think my understanding of how people who are innovators who are creating new projects are thinking about it is they wouldn't dream of starting a token project in the United States at this point. I mean, there's absolutely no way. There's no question that the innovation is being pushed out of the US. And even existing companies in the US are relocating abroad because it's just not a tenable situation. I think it's impossible to underscore how difficult it is to work on a token project in the United States when you have a regulator taking the position that literally all token projects are securities.
Yeah, no, I think we all know how important that is. And I think whether you're innovating in the United States or you're innovating outside the United States, that's a major roadblock to that innovation. We should pause for a moment and think positively. There are examples of regulators, kind of getting ahead of the curve and putting some regulatory certainty around new and novel areas in our industry. I think it's worth noting that. Retta, you noted staking, the staking rules in clarity in Switzerland. I'm struck by Abu Dhabi Global Market issuing guidance on DAO, on establishing DAOs in ADGM and using them for governance of token projects. So let me ask your other examples that you've seen or you think are important to point out of where regulation has either tackled novel issues or is working to tackle them in ways that are going to really help innovation. Demetrius, do you want to start with that?
Sure. May I say something on the fragmentation that the ladies start talking, because it's the moment I have to reply to. And it was also the moment that, because I was thinking about a controversial comment to make in order all you guys to remember something and come back next year, continue the conversation. So, fragmentation is a major issue for you and for the regulators also. I started by this Brussels effect idea. We also need to consider the geopolitical dimension of the story. These things have become very geopolitical, and we had this Silicon Valley of regulation idea. It's actually, I heard it first time in America. He said, Americans innovate, Europeans regulate, and Asians copy and improve. We reached the point that geopolitical tensions force us to have a very clear stance, at least in the group of the West. And because we have that discrepancies between the jurisdictions, it seems that we are in a leadership moment where Europe has to regulate, Europe has to innovate, and he who doesn't copy ends into a blacklist. And this is something that is very, very often heard in the corridors of the European Commission and the European Parliament. And this is something that we need to use channels like GBBC to bring the two sides of the Atlantic together. On the fragmentation, MiCA does not have equivalence. I hope MiCA 2 is going to have equivalence measures in. We don't have equivalence because it's very new technology. We don't know what we don't know. As long as we don't know what we don't know, it's better not to have collaborations and synergies between people with different views. But MiCA 2 hopefully will have some equivalence. From the market side now, never ask for harmonization. This is the wrong term. Ask for coordination. Ask for enhanced coordination in order everybody to speak the same vocabulary, at least. This was the comment. Now, on your question, and we go further, a very good example is not define DeFi. This is the European Union approach on decentralized finance. We don't know what we don't know. We don't want to harm it. It's not time for us to do it. This is helpful.
Interesting. Want to respond to any of those points?
Oh, so much. I will just pick a couple things. Thinking more broadly than the West, when we think about people innovating, Japan was way out in front. You have amazing things coming out of Hong Kong and Singapore, Dubai with the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority. So there is so much of the world outside of the West that's coming forward that we also need to factor in. And I agree, fragmentation is a problem. I don't think the U.S. would conceivably adopt a European approach, right? But I think that maybe the word I like to use is interoperable. If we can get standards that work and that we can, big companies are used to this, right? Like we've been in a globalized world for a long time. There's really there's very few sectors where it's like the same thing in every state. So we've done this before in other sectors. We can do it here. But yeah, I don't think that many countries will copy and paste.
Fair. Marta, thoughts?
Well, I'll double click on your point about DAOs, because I think that's actually a really interesting one, right? So the issue with DAOs is, when it comes to things like creating an entity, a lot of people think about that as something that is, onerous, right? Like if you're in the crypto space, you're like, oh, an entity, like that's bad. But in fact, what an entity does is it protects the individuals, right? So that the individuals aren't the ones liable for what is happening. It's a shield. And so that is one area where, there's been a big problem for DAO participants for a long time, because when you're participating in a DAO, the DAO doesn't have an entity. You have a lot of potential individual liability for participating in the DAO. And we've had court cases that have applied liability to people who are participating in DAOs. And so that's an example of where you can really have lawmakers come in and help by creating a law that, in this case, enables DAOs to actually still be a DAO, but also create an entity and sort of adapts entity structures to how DAOs actually operate. So that's a great example.
Yeah, and this is an issue, and in the U.S. the way this works is basically if you create any kind of organization with more than one person, and you don't have an entity structure to it, it's a partnership, a general partnership, and all partners are liable. And so that's why it's such an important issue. Really, you want to add?
Yeah.
Demetrius, you look like you wanted to jump in.
So different aspects, but it's the same principle in Switzerland actually with the simple partnership. However, we can easily link a DAO to a Swiss association. Again, there Swiss associations comes in. With regard to, it's also interesting with MiCA, and we are directly exposed to it. I mean, it was our decision to not be part of the EU, and now we feel it in Switzerland because there is no third country access to it. We actually lose a big market to the EU with a strict but good regulation. On the other side, I think what we try to do is we saw it in December also with the UK. We will enter into a new agreement with the UK where we simply do mutual recognition over many different financial market sectors for funds, for financial market infrastructures, banking, securities, for at least professional investors, where we mutually recognize each other's regulation, which is a good way to cooperate. However, we still have to find out to which degree crypto is also covered.
So here's the thing, and we, as a former boss of mine, used to say, make sure you don't suffer from Christopher Columbus syndrome. We're getting a little bit off topic, but just because something is new to you doesn't mean it's new. And so, Marta, blockchain technology is not the only open source software regime that's, this is not the first. What can we draw from that and kind of other efforts to regulate in the open source software space?
Yeah, so this is actually something that has been really interesting to me for a number of years, which is that there are a lot of really important, from a U.S. sort of civil liberties perspective, there are a lot of really important legal precedents in the open source space that are also very important for crypto. So one example is in the US, we have First Amendment protection, and that First Amendment protection applies to computer code, to writing computer code. So the act of writing computer code actually has First Amendment protections for it. There are other important aspects there as well, but just to go with that one for a second, one of the major issues that has come up this past year was tornado cash, right? And what happened there was really people being prosecuted and held accountable for, in some cases, just merely writing computer code. And so suddenly, for a long time, I think what has happened with open source communities beyond cryptocurrency is there has been this feeling of, well, that's about money. And so that's different. And so if there are civil liberties being trampled or, other policy issues in cryptocurrency, that's different from us other open source projects over here, right? But actually, cryptocurrency is sort of on the front lines, right? The first shots that are being taken at the important civil liberties protections around open source software are being taken at cryptocurrency. And so finally, I think with Tornado Cash, the broader community of open source is sort of realizing, wow, really bad things can happen here, and we should actually care about what happens, and not look the other way just because, well, that's about money.
So that's interesting. I want to build on that question because, as that debate broke out, yes, so on the one hand, software is software and it's protected. No, this software is money, or this software is enabling monetary transactions. So it's different. A related issue is privacy technology. Are privacy enhancing coins? Are they privacy protecting coins? Are they criminal enabling coins? Our Treasury Department just finally threw its hand up and invented a new term, right? Anonymity enhanced cryptocurrency, so that they had, as we like to have in Washington, an acronym to be able to use. Nomini, how important is a common taxonomy for having these debates, and how much is innovation getting kind of held back without having it?
Well, I'd like to repeat a phrase from the last panel, which is stop making up new words. Because it really doesn't help us when we're trying to explain things to policymakers. We complain policymakers don't get it. It's because we make it really hard to get, because we use a word like transaction, but then we don't mean transaction. And then we get mad that they want to talk about it in financial services and not in commerce or some other committee, but we use the word transaction, right? So if we just kind of use words as regular people use them, it would help us a lot.
That's a really good point. Demetrius, I want to come back to something that you said, which is that there's a geopolitical aspect of all of this. I'm not going to use the impolitic phrasing that you used, but I'm going to ask you, look, not only are we in a world where there is not regulatory harmonization or interoperability, but the trends are not trending towards greater kind of cooperation, continued open flow of information and value. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. Are we geopolitically heading more towards an environment of, hardened blocks where we're trying to find ways through? Are we heading towards the digital equivalent of Changi Airport in Singapore, where each gate has its own security that is recalibrated each time a new flight from a new carrier with a new flag going to a new destination comes in and out of that space?
First, let me tell you that I believe that the world is not as fragmented as it seems. And more or less, everybody can find the words that carry the same way in the lips and in the hearts of the people, because no matter what, first, we all want to help a market flourish and help people. We want stability, we want certainty. We all use exactly the same vocabulary, and we believe on this vocabulary no matter where we are. The fundamental approach is that blockchain is not illegal. And I use this term because there was a very influential book 10 years ago, 6 years ago, from Primavera de Filippi, Law and Blockchain. She claimed that blockchain is inherently illegal, and she started inventing the concept of legal wrappers. And first, I don't believe that that kind of innovation can be addressed with legal wrappers, but everybody has to identify a concept of liability and address the 3-4 words that carry the same weight in the hearts and the lips of all of us. So I'm optimist.
Well, that's good. We need a little bit of that. Reto, Switzerland really feels like a jurisdiction that has addressed a lot of the different issues that we've talked about. But from your perspective and from the work that you do and the clients that you're serving, what's the next thing that Switzerland needs to do to enable innovation within regulation?
I think it's maybe exactly what we talked about with this nationalization now and this fragmentation. In the end, it's not so much about the law, the regulation here. I think this will suit most cases. It's technology neutral. But Switzerland is, in the end, although very famous, interestingly, most people know about Switzerland, it's a very small market in the end. And as all small economies, its success only comes if we are a very open economy. We live of export, and we need to have open barriers and actually, ideally, frameworks which go a lot more wider than only Switzerland, actually. And this is, I think, what we have to try and to support to find back to this multilateral and global approach and open markets.
Alan, may I say something on this?
Please.
Principles before starting regulating are very, very important. We have this wonderful word, technological neutrality. It's in the lips of everybody. Technological neutrality does not exist if it's not coupled with business model neutrality. This was fundamental issue in MiCA regulation and all the associated regulations. We claimed technological neutrality, but we advanced existing legacy business models. This is my...
No, if I may, indeed. Also, if we say the lot in Switzerland, in the end, also our regulator, it's not everything is technology neutral. And in the end, it's maybe the wording of the law. I mean, you don't find the word DLT anywhere in our law, but in the end, the technology has its own risks in the end and its own business models, and this necessarily comes to differentiating maybe between someone doing a very similar thing on blockchain than in the traditional world, but the risks are different in the end.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be the last word. I want to thank our panelists, Marta and Lee, because yes, please give them a big round of applause. Not a regulatory panel.